Andrew Grant stood on the front porch of his home in Maple Grove, Minnesota, staring at the door he had opened thousands of times before. Tonight, after a full week of silence and disappearance, the simple act of turning a key felt like stepping onto a battlefield. The cold November air pressed against his back, but the chill came from within. His fingers trembled as he held the house key, and his breath caught in his throat the moment the porch light flickered on above him. Everything in him whispered that he was walking into judgment. He knew Allison better than anyone. 20 years of marriage had taught him every rhythm of her moods, every shade of her disappointment, every quiet shift in her expression when something didn't sit right with her. And in all those years, not once, not a single time, had she forgiven a lie easily. She wasn't dramatic, she wasn't unstable, she didn't throw dishes or scream, but she carried truth like a blade, and dishonesty cut her deeper than betrayal itself. Andrew swallowed hard, remembering the first time he'd lied to her early in their marriage. Nothing serious, just a harmless omission about forgetting to mail a document she needed. She had looked at him with a calm, flat stare, the kind that reached further than anger. "Just tell me the truth," she had said. "I can fix mistakes. I can't fix lies." He never forgot the way her voice sounded then. Steady, quiet, but unmistakably wounded. And yet he had lied again. Many times. Small things. Foolish things. Things he had justified to himself. A late meeting. A business dinner that didn't include business. A canceled lunch he didn't mention. A flirtation he convinced himself was harmless. Each time, Allison reacted the same way, calm but cold, hurt but controlled. He remembered the night he came home late from an office party. She had waited up for him, sitting at the dining table with a cup of chamomile tea, her posture straight, her hands folded. "You should tell me when your plans change," she said without raising her voice. He tried to explain, but she cut through every excuse. For a week afterward, she cooked only for herself, placing leftovers for him in the microwave with a small sticky note that read, "Reheat for 2 minutes." The message wasn't about food. It was about trust. Then there was the time he forgot to mention a 2-day work trip. She didn't speak to him for 7 days, not out of punishment, but because she said she had nothing to say until she believed him again. But this was different. This was an entire week. No calls, no messages, phone off, disappeared. And the worst part was that he wasn't alone during that week. Marissa Taylor's voice echoed in his mind, sharp, impatient, seductive in the way only a bad idea could be. "Love is gone, Andrew. Stop dragging this out. You said it yourself. You said your marriage is empty." He had been lying on her bed when she said it, staring at the ceiling like a coward who didn't know how to walk away from one life or another. She had pressed her hand against his chest. Just tell her. Rip the bandage off. You owe yourself that much. But Andrew knew better. He knew Allison wasn't the kind of woman who stepped aside quietly. She didn't break down. She broke open. She didn't scream. She analyzed. And she never, ever let betrayal slip by unnoticed. 5 years ago, when he simply forgot to text her while out with colleagues, she had blown up half the house with her frustration. And that was for something small. Harmless. This week-long vanishing wasn't small. What terrified him most wasn't Allison's anger. It was Allison's silence. Silence from her was never indifference. Silence from her meant she was thinking, processing, rearranging the pieces of her world until they formed a weapon. And he hadn't heard from her once. Not a single call. No texts. No questions. No, where are you? No, are you alive? Nothing. Just silence. He stood frozen at the door, hearing only the creak of frozen branches swaying in the wind. His heart thudded painfully against his ribs. He imagined Allison in the living room, sitting still, waiting, not to hear his explanation, but to deliver her verdict. Because that was who she was. Steady, sharp, patient in the most unnerving way. Andrew inhaled shakily, slid the key toward the lock, and felt the metallic click echo like a gunshot. For a moment, the world went silent, as if holding its breath with him. Then he turned the key, and the door opened. The sentence of whatever came next hung over him like an unspoken death sentence. While Andrew vanished into whatever story he had woven for himself, the house in Maple Grove settled into a strange, unsettling quiet. For the first 2 days, Allison Grant waited, calmly, mechanically, moving through the rhythms of her life. She cooked, she cleaned, she drove Mason to school and reminded Emily about her chemistry quiz. From the outside, nothing appeared unusual. But inside her chest, something cold and decisive had begun to take shape. On the 3rd day, she stopped waiting. It began with the scent, a perfume she didn't own, drifting faintly from Andrew's shirt pocket as she gathered the week's laundry. It was floral, too sweet, too young for a woman her age. She lifted the fabric closer, inhaling carefully. Jasmine, citrus, and something powdery at the end. Allison didn't wear fragrances. She preferred unscented lotions and soft laundry detergent. This wasn't an accidental transfer. This was someone else. From there, the unraveling started. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost graceful as she carried Andrew's phone charger to the office desk and noticed the reflection of a notification on his tablet screen. She didn't touch anything she didn't need to. Andrew had synced his devices to a shared cloud years ago, back when trust between them had felt effortless. That small detail he had forgotten became the window she now looked through. She opened the message history, not to pry, but to confirm what her body already sensed. The name appeared like a bruise blooming on clean skin. Marissa. There was no greeting, no subtlety, just a heart, shining in digital certainty. The thread was filled with plans, excuses, fragments of intimacy disguised as casual check-ins. None of it was graphic. Andrew wasn't the type, but the emotional betrayal curled through every word. Words like miss you and can't wait and she won't know. Words that hurt more than any physical act could. Allison stared at the screen for a long moment. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She didn't shake. Instead, she exhaled. 20 years of marriage condensed into a single, sharp breath. She walked downstairs into the kitchen, where the late afternoon light cast soft gold across the granite countertop. Inside the second drawer, beneath a stack of napkins, she kept a small envelope filled with photographs Andrew had once claimed were work event memories. She had always believed him. She had no reason not to. But now, lifting the flap, she found several undeveloped film prints, careless, messy, and unmistakably intimate. Allison took her time. She laid each photograph flat on the counter, studying every detail. A hand, a shoulder, a shadow of hair that wasn't hers, the neckline of a dress she had never owned. Marina in the original story had been replaced, appropriately, by Marissa Taylor, the real face now materializing behind every lie. When she finished cataloging them in her mind, she stepped toward the sink, tossed the photos in one by one, and turned on the garbage disposal. The shredder roared to life, grinding plastic and gloss into dust. Tiny white flecks swirled through the drain like snow in stormwater. She watched without blinking. She didn't need physical evidence. The truth was already carved into her memory. Afterward, Allison stood in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. She leaned her hands on the counter and let her thoughts settle. Not broken, not devastated, simply realigned. 20 years of sacrifice. 20 years of choosing her family over her own ambitions. 20 years of loyalty, given without question. 20 years deserve a worthy ending, she whispered. It wasn't rage. It wasn't vengeance, spoken aloud. It was a recognition of value. Her value. And the finality that came with betrayal. That night, long after Emily and Mason went to bed. Allison walked to the bathroom mirror. The overhead light was soft, almost forgiving. She studied her reflection, a woman who had loved deeply, endured quietly, and now stood at the threshold of something sharper, clearer. She touched the mirror with the tips of her fingers, acknowledging herself. Not the wife, not the mother, but the woman beneath all of it. Tomorrow, she told herself, the plan begins. And for the first time in years, her expression didn't look tired. It looked awake. The next morning unfolded with unsettling precision, as if the house itself sensed the fragile balance holding everything together. Dawn filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting soft stripes of light across the tile floor. The heater clicked on, sending a faint hum through the rooms. In every way, it looked like an ordinary Thursday morning in Maple Grove, but nothing felt ordinary. Allison moved through the kitchen with a calmness that felt unnatural, too measured, too quiet, too composed. She brushed her teeth without rushing, tied her hair back the same way she always did, and stepped into her slippers as if following choreography she had rehearsed for years. Her hand reached instinctively for the coffee beans. She ground them with steady pressure. She heated the skillet for pancakes the way she always had on school mornings. From the outside, everything was identical. Inside, though, a cold stillness lived beneath her skin. Not anger, not pain, something cleaner, sharper, a strange calm that had settled like frost over her thoughts. Andrew watched from the doorway, hovering a step too far from entering. He had slept poorly or barely at all. His eyes were swollen around the edges, and his shoulders slumped like he carried a weight he couldn't set down. Every time Allison lifted a utensil or flipped a pancake, he flinched slightly, bracing for a conversation that never came. Because Allison said nothing. No interrogation, no accusations, no acknowledgement of his disappearance. Just a serene neutrality that terrified him far more than rage would have. Emily was the first to pick up on it. She came down the stairs, rubbing her eyes, her backpack slung over one shoulder, still thinking about her chemistry quiz. But the moment she stepped into the kitchen, she froze. Her gaze drifted from her mother's unnaturally calm posture to her father's anxious hovering. "Morning," Allison said pleasantly, sliding a plate of pancakes across the counter. Emily blinked. "Morning, Mom." The tone didn't match the smile. The smile didn't match the silence. Something in her chest tightened, and she took a seat carefully, as if afraid to disturb the air around them. Mason barreled down the stairs next, humming to himself, only to stop halfway when he spotted the scene. His mom moving like a perfectly programmed machine, his dad standing as if awaiting sentencing. He leaned toward his sister and whispered under his breath, "What's going on?" Emily whispered back, "I don't know. Mom feels off." Mason nodded, glancing toward Andrew. "Dad looks scared." Andrew heard them. Of course he did, but he pretended not to. His jaw tightened as he sat across from them. He tried to catch Allison's gaze, but she didn't lift her eyes from the pan. She placed another pancake on a plate with delicate precision. The rhythm of the spatula against the skillet was the only sound in the room. For a moment, the children watched their parents like spectators in a silent play. Something in the atmosphere felt stretched thin, like a string pulled too tight. Allison's movements were gentle but calculated. Andrew's were hesitant, stiff. The contrast between them created a tension so thick it clung to the walls. Emily broke the silence first. "Dad, are you okay?" Andrew startled slightly. "Yeah, just tired." Allison set a cup of coffee in front of him, not harshly, not warmly, just placed it down with a steady hand. "Long week?" she asked, her tone light, almost airy. Too airy. Andrew's breath caught. "Yeah, something like that." She only nodded, her expression unreadable. For the kids, this was the strangest part. Not anger, not fighting, but this chilling politeness that didn't belong in their house. Emily tried to force a smile, but it didn't stay long. Mason kept fiddling with his fork, pretending he wasn't watching everything, but his eyes darted between his parents every few seconds. When breakfast ended, Allison wiped the counter clean with slow, circular motions. Andrew stood there helplessly, wishing she would shout at him, demand an explanation, do anything that would give him permission to confess. But she didn't. She simply rinsed the cloth and hung it neatly on the faucet. "Kids," she said softly, "get your things. We'll leave in 5 minutes." Her voice was gentle, even warm, but it carried no emotion, no tremor, no sign of the storm beneath her surface. Andrew felt cold all over. He watched her walk past him, feeling the weight of what she wasn't saying pressing harder than any accusation could. He opened his mouth once, twice, trying to speak, to break the silence, but the words evaporated before they could form. Allison didn't need to ask questions. She didn't need to confront him. Her silence was the confrontation. And Andrew understood, too late, that the calm in her eyes was not peace. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. The halls of Maple Grove High buzzed with weekend energy as parents, teachers, and clusters of students filed toward the gymnasium for the district robotics competition. Streamers in the school colors, navy and gold, hung from the rafters, and a banner reading "Welcome, Innovators," stretched over the entrance. The air smelled faintly of popcorn from the concession stand and the sterile scent of freshly waxed floors. The Grants arrived as a family, walking side by side, but they did not look like one. Allison led the way, holding Mason's project binder in one hand and resting her other hand lightly on his shoulder. Her steps were confident, her posture calm, her smile perfectly gentle. She greeted teachers, nodded at other parents, and encouraged Mason with soft, steady words. Anyone watching would have thought she was the proud mother of a young rising star. And she was, but today her presence carried an extra layer of composure, an almost serene steadiness that felt too controlled. Emily trailed close behind them, her eyes flicking between her parents with wary curiosity. She understood, in the way perceptive teenagers do, that something was wrong even if no one said it aloud. Andrew walked beside them, but always a step behind, like a man trying to re-enter his own life through a door that kept shifting. He adjusted his jacket, checked his phone too often, and kept glancing at Allison, as though searching for an opening that never came. The gym noise made him dizzy, and every shout of excitement from students felt like it vibrated inside his skull. But Mason didn't notice any of that. Not yet. He tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Will Dad really come? You promise?" Allison bent down, smoothing his collar. "We're all here, sweetheart." Her voice was warm, soothing, absolutely sincere in tone. But Andrew flinched like the sentence had struck him. "Of course I'm here," he said quickly, forcing a smile. "I wouldn't miss this for anything." Mason's face brightened. Pure, uncomplicated trust. "Okay, because last year you missed regionals when you got stuck at work." A small pause. Then Allison continued walking. Andrew felt his throat tighten. "That was different," he muttered. Emily glanced at him sharply, catching the guilt in his posture. Inside the gym, noise swelled, cheers clapping, the metallic clatter of robots being tested on the qualification field. Mason's team gathered near table 12, adjusting sensors and rearranging spare wires. Allison guided him to join them, her hand steady on his back. "You've prepared well," she said softly. "Just do what you practiced." "What about you, Mom? Will you watch from the front?" he asked. "I'll be right there." Her smile didn't waver. Andrew watched her help Mason settle in, noting how effortlessly she blended into the moment, how normal she appeared. It unsettled him. He had expected a cold shoulder, a private confrontation. tension simmering beneath each breath. But Allison's composure was flawless, unbreakable, far more terrifying than anger. He took a seat in the bleachers beside Emily. That was when his phone vibrated. A message lit up the screen. "Marissa, did you talk to her yet?" "Marissa, Andrew? I'm waiting." He turned the phone face down, pulse spiking. Emily noticed. "Work?" she asked, her voice neutral but her eyes sharp. "Something like that," he said. Allison walked up the bleachers and sat at the far end of their row, a few seats away, not distant enough to seem unnatural, but far enough to draw a subtle line. She crossed her legs, folded her hands at her lap, and watched the arena with calm interest. The juxtaposition was suffocating. Allison, serene, steady, composed. Andrew, jittery, sweating, eyes darting to his phone. Emily, stiff with suspicion. Mason, hopeful, unaware. The announcer called for the first round. The robotic platforms whirred to life. Mason stepped forward with his team, clutching the controller, glancing back just once to confirm his parents were watching. Allison gave him a reassuring nod. Andrew forced a thumbs up. Another vibration buzzed against his leg. Andrew's hand twitched toward his phone. "Marissa, you promised. Don't chicken out." He shut his eyes for a moment, wishing his guilt weren't so loud. In the middle of a cheerful school gym, surrounded by families cheering for their children, Andrew felt like a stain on a perfect photograph. Because here they were, a picture-perfect family supporting their son. And he was the crack running through the frame. The round began. The crowd cheered. Mason smiled. Only Allison remained perfectly still, watching it all with a quietness so deliberate it almost shimmered. Her plan had already started. Andrew just didn't know it yet. The competition ended with cheers spilling across the gym. Mason's team placed second, an achievement that lit his entire face with pride. Parents gathered, taking photos, exchanging congratulations, and promising celebratory ice cream stops on the way home. From the outside, the Grants looked like every other happy family filing out into the crisp Minnesota afternoon. But beneath that normalcy, something precise, something intentional, was already unfolding. Emily spotted a group of friends near the flagpole and waved to her mother. "They're going for burgers. Can I go?" Allison didn't hesitate. "Of course," she said warmly. "Be home by 9. Emily blinked, surprised by how easily the permission came. "Thanks, Mom," she murmured, then shot another quick glance toward her father, who looked anything but stable. She didn't say it aloud, but something inside her whispered that leaving her parents alone felt risky. Mason tugged at Allison's sleeve next. "Mom, can I go to Grandpa Harold's? He said he'd show me how to solder better joints for next year's robot." Allison smiled gently, brushing a hand through his hair. "He'll love that." "Yes. Let's drop you off." Andrew's stomach sank. With Emily going out and Mason spending the evening with his grandfather, the carefully balanced shield of family presence was dissolving. He felt suddenly exposed. They walked to the car together, Allison leading, Mason skipping ahead, Andrew trailing like a shadow that didn't want to touch the light. The sun was lowering behind the pines, throwing long stripes of gold and gray across the parking lot. The drive to Harold's house was filled with Mason's excited chatter. Allison responded with perfect maternal warmth. Andrew tried to contribute, but his voice came out thin, barely audible. He kept glancing at the rearview mirror, not at the cars behind them, but at his own reflection, as if checking whether guilt was written across his forehead. When they reached Harold's driveway, Mason bolted out of the car, clutching his project binder. Harold opened the door, waving, beaming with pride. "You did great today. Champ." Harold called. "Mom said I can stay for a few hours." Mason shouted back. Allison leaned over the passenger seat. "Call me if you get tired." "I won't." Mason yelled before disappearing into the house. Harold, gave a friendly wave to both parents. But he paused for a split second when his eyes met Andrew's, brows knitting slightly, sensing something unspoken beneath the surface. Then he nodded and closed the door. The moment the door clicked shut, the world went quiet. Allison buckled her seatbelt with slow, deliberate ease. Andrew stood frozen outside the car for a moment, breathing the chilly air as if it might give him courage. Then he slid into the passenger seat beside her. The silence inside the car was immediate, thick, charged, pressing against his lungs. Allison turned the key. The engine hummed. They didn't drive off right away. She stared through the windshield, her voice calm, almost serene. "It's been a long day." Andrew swallowed. "Yeah, Mason did great." "He did." She nodded. "You must be proud." Her tone was polite, controlled. That frightened him more than fury could have. They pulled out of the driveway. The street was quiet, lined with bare maple trees and winter-dead lawns. The faint hum of the heater filled the car. 3 blocks later, Allison spoke again. "Tonight," she said softly, her hand steady on the wheel, "I'll show you something interesting." Andrew's heartbeat stopped for half a second. Her voice didn't shift, didn't sharpen. It was smooth, almost gentle. "Something I've been working on for 2 months. Andrew's breath hitched. His fingers tightened around his seatbelt strap. The words crashed into him like cold water, sending panic through every nerve. 2 months. 2 months ago was when things with Marissa had escalated. His throat constricted painfully. His palms began to sweat. His mind raced through every possible secret she might have discovered. Every message, every late night, every small lie he thought had dissolved into the air. "Allison," he whispered, "what do you mean?" She didn't look at him. "You'll see." He felt like the temperature inside the car had dropped 10 degrees. The road stretched ahead in a blur, but Andrew barely registered the scenery. He stared at her profile, the calm expression, the relaxed shoulders, and felt dread coil tightly around his spine. She didn't sound angry. She didn't sound hurt. She sounded prepared. The kind of prepared that meant the ground had already shifted beneath his feet. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. Inside the car, the atmosphere was pulled so tight it felt like a violin string stretched to its breaking point, waiting for the slightest pressure to snap. The house was wrapped in an evening stillness when they returned, too still, too perfect, as though every sound inside was holding itself back in anticipation. The last traces of daylight slipped behind the rows of fir trees behind the grand home, and the living room lamps cast a warm, golden glow across the furniture. From the outside, it looked like any other suburban home settling into a quiet Saturday night. But inside, something was unfolding with ritualistic precision. Allison stepped out of her shoes the moment she entered the hallway. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if each gesture had been rehearsed. Andrew stood behind her, frozen in the entranceway, unsure whether to follow her, speak to her, or disappear into another room. His mind was a storm of questions, but every one of them dissolved the moment Allison spoke. "I'm going to get ready," she said softly. "It won't take long." Ready for what? The question throbbed behind his ribs, but he didn't dare ask it aloud. He watched her walk down the hallway toward the bedroom, noting the graceful, composed way she carried herself. Nothing rushed, nothing tense, a calmness so profound it terrified him more than any confrontation could have. The bedroom door closed with a quiet click. Andrew stood alone in the living room, hands trembling as he sank onto the edge of the couch. His phone buzzed again, then again. 3 vibrations in the span of 30 seconds. He didn't need to look. He knew exactly who it was. But when the 4th buzz came, dread forced him to flip the phone over. "Marissa, are you home?" "Marissa!" "Andrew, we need to talk." "Marissa, did you tell her?" "You said tonight." "Marissa!" I'm losing patience. He locked the screen and placed the phone face down on the cushion beside him, as though hiding the screen might hide the truth. His stomach churned. His throat felt tight. Every message was a countdown, a reminder that the life he'd been balancing poorly was collapsing. He rubbed his forehead with the heel of his palm. "Please, not tonight," he whispered to no one. But tonight wasn't his to control. A soft sound pulled him from his spiral, Allison's footsteps approaching down the hallway. When he looked up, the sight of her stole the breath from his lungs. She stood framed in the doorway, wearing a deep Bordeaux-colored dress that fell just below her knees, elegant in a way that seemed timeless. The fabric hugged her waist gently and moved with her when she walked, capturing the light with a quiet sheen. Her hair, usually loose or tied back casually, had been gathered into a low, delicate twist at the nape of her neck. A pair of small pearl earrings glimmered beneath the lamp glow. Her makeup was subtle, soft eyeliner, natural lips, a hint of warmth on her cheeks. It wasn't the look of a woman preparing for a date. It was the look of a woman preparing for a reckoning. Andrew's breath stuttered. His palms dampened. He couldn't understand what she was dressing for, why she looked so composed, so intentional, so powerful. "Allison," he murmured, voice barely stable. "Why are you?" She crossed the room slowly, gracefully, her heels tapping softly against the hardwood floor. "I told you," she said, her tone almost tender. "I have something to show you tonight." "Something from 2 months ago," Andrew whispered, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. A faint smile touched her lips, beautiful, chilling. "Yes." She sat across from him, crossing her legs with the poise of someone entirely in control. Her eyes calm, observant, studied him with quiet intensity. The softness of her voice didn't match the sharp intelligence behind her gaze. This was the Allison who never needed to shout to make herself understood. The Allison who could break someone with silence alone. He tried to steady his breathing. He failed. His phone buzzed again. The sound sliced the air like a blade. Andrew jumped, fumbling to silence it. Allison's eyes flicked toward the device, a brief, calculated glance. Not long enough to betray emotion, but long enough to let him know she registered everything. She lifted her gaze back to him, her expression serene. "You can answer that if you'd like." "No," he said instantly, almost too quickly. "It's nothing important." Another faint smile curved her lips. "If you say so." She leaned back slightly, hands resting lightly in her lap, her posture relaxed, but her presence filled the entire room. She wasn't angry. She wasn't grieving. She wasn't broken. She was prepared, and Andrew suddenly understood something with horrifying clarity. Allison wasn't staging a confrontation. She was staging a revelation. And she had been preparing for this night, down to the last detail, for far longer than he realized. The living room felt almost ceremonial by the time Allison returned from the kitchen. She carried a small porcelain tray, the good one, the one she usually saved for holidays or when her father visited. On it sat a teapot of jasmine tea, 2 cups, and a bowl of honey. Everything arranged with quiet precision. Andrew watched her approach with a dread that crawled beneath his skin. "Allison, we don't have to do this right now," he murmured. She smiled gently, pouring the tea with steady hands. "Sit with me." The softness of her tone left him no room to decline. He sank into the armchair across from her, feeling like a schoolboy summoned by a teacher who already knew the truth. The warmth of the room felt oppressive, like the air itself was pressing down on him. Allison handed him a cup. Her fingers never shook. Andrew's did. "Thank you," he whispered, taking it with both hands to hide the tremble. She sat back on the couch, legs crossed, posture graceful and relaxed. Every movement was elegant, composed, and utterly terrifying. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It had structure, weight, purpose. Allison was the one who finally broke it. It's interesting, she said quietly, stirring a spoonful of honey into her own cup. How time teaches us to notice things we once overlooked. Andrew swallowed hard. What do you mean? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a slow sip, the steam curling around her face in delicate wisps. When she set the cup down, she looked at him, fully directly. Her eyes were calm, but her gaze held a depth that made his pulse spike. 20 years, she said softly, is a long time to notice patterns. The sentence landed like ice water down his spine. He tried to breathe, but it felt like his lungs were shrinking. Patterns. She nodded once, lightly. Everyone has them. You, me, our children. Most people never look closely enough to see them, but living with someone for 20 years gives you a unique vantage point. He forced a shaky smile. I suppose so. But Allison wasn't smiling anymore. I've learned, she continued, still in that same gentle, unhurried voice, that silence reveals more than words do. People think lying is about what they say, but often it's about what they avoid saying. Andrew's grip tightened around the teacup. His knuckles whitened. She wasn't accusing him, not directly. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't even angry. That made it worse. Allison, if I've done something to upset you. Oh, Andrew, she cut in softly. This isn't about upsetting me. Her interruption wasn't sharp. It wasn't cruel. It simply folded over his words with the quiet confidence of someone who held the map to the entire conversation. He felt stripped bare. She leaned back, folding her hands neatly in her lap. You've had a long week, haven't you? The question was simple, neutral, but it felt like a spotlight trained on the darkest corner of his life. I didn't mean to worry you, he whispered. I didn't say I was worried, she replied gently. His heart slammed against his ribs. Every answer he gave felt like stepping onto cracking ice. They sat in silence again, the tension coiling tighter, almost physical. The ticking clock on the mantelpiece grew louder with each second. Andrew set his teacup down, afraid he might drop it. Allison, please, if you have something to say, just say it. She tilted her head the slightest bit. I'm saying it. No, you're not, he whispered. I am, she corrected softly, just not in the way you expect. Her calmness was suffocating. She took another sip of tea, her eyes never leaving his. People reveal themselves, she murmured, sometimes intentionally, sometimes through the small things, a change in routine, a forgotten detail, a misplaced item. She let that hang in the air before adding, sometimes through absences. A full week away, his blood ran cold. He opened his mouth, maybe to confess, maybe to defend himself, maybe to deny everything, but no words came out. His throat was locked. Allison leaned forward, resting her elbows lightly on her knees. Her voice softened further, almost to a whisper. Andrew, I've learned that when the truth is ready, it doesn't need to be forced. It simply arrives. He felt bile rise in his stomach. She wasn't asking him to confess. She was letting him sit in the awareness that she already knew. The false calm thickened around them, compressing the space until breathing felt like a luxury. Allison reached for her cup again, her expression serene. Drink your tea before it cools. Andrew's hands shook as he lifted the cup. The conversation had been polite, quiet, almost tender, but every word she spoke was a scalpel, slicing through the facade he was desperately trying to hold together. And the worst part was that she hadn't raised her voice once. The tea on the table had barely cooled when Allison stood up, smoothing the skirt of her Bordeaux dress. Her movements remained fluid, graceful, almost peaceful. Andrew's pulse thudded in his ears. He watched her cross the living room, not with anger, not with urgency, but with the quiet assurance of someone who already held the outcome in her hands. Allison, he whispered, his voice thin, What are you doing?" She didn't answer. Instead, she retrieved her laptop from the credenza near the dining room. The way she carried it, carefully, intentionally, made Andrew feel like he was watching someone lift a casket lid. She returned to the coffee table, set the laptop down, and opened it. The screen glow illuminated her calm face. Andrew's hands began to shake. She typed in her password with steady fingers. No dramatic pause. No theatrical emphasis. Just quiet efficiency. Then she turned the laptop toward him. "Let's start here." His stomach dropped. On the screen was a list of message backups. iCloud logs. Not hacked. Not stolen. Simply synchronized, a setting he himself had activated years ago and forgotten about. A completely legal, completely standard feature of Apple's shared environment. "Allison," his voice cracked. "I didn't mean—" She raised a hand, not to silence him, but to maintain the steady pacing of what she'd prepared. "No rush," she said softly. "We'll go step by step." Her gentleness was unbearable. She clicked on a message thread. Marissa Taylor. Hundreds of texts scrolled before him. Dates, times, locations. Plans. Excuses. Apologies. Flirtations. Promises. He felt physically ill. Allison scrolled with two slow, controlled motions of her fingertip. "I didn't read everything," she said calmly. "Just enough for context." He almost choked. Just enough felt like a blade pressed to his throat. Next, she opened a folder labeled neatly, Documentation. October to December. His breath seized. Inside were subfolders, receipts, photos and screenshots, timeline notes, call logs, patterns, each one dated, each one organized, each one undeniable. Andrew's mouth went dry. "Allison, you've been tracking this? For how long?" She didn't look at him when she answered. 2 months. The words hit him harder than any accusation could. 2 months. 2 months of her quietly gathering everything. 2 months of her piecing together a map of his betrayal. 2 months where she had acted normal, gentle, steady, patient. 2 months where he had assumed she suspected nothing. Her next click opened the receipts folder. "Here," she said softly, "I traced your card statements. Dinner charges, you told me, were working late. Hotel transactions. Rideshare logs." He'd forgotten she had access to the joint statement. Forgotten that receipts arrive automatically in email archives neither of them ever deleted. "All legal," she added gently. "Just information any spouse in a shared household can see." Andrew buried his face in his hands. Shame boiled up, thick and suffocating. But Allison wasn't finished. Not harshly. Not triumphantly. Just completing what she had prepared. She opened the photos folder. Images appeared, GPS tagged, pictures Marissa had sent him. Not explicit, but intimate. A hand holding coffee on a cafe table. A selfie outside a hotel. A blurred shot of 2 wine glasses. Allison did not linger on them. She simply said, "These were stored in the cloud. I didn't manipulate or retrieve them unlawfully. They were already there." He felt sick. I never meant for things to. Again, that gentle hand lifted in quiet interruption. "I know." Those 2 words hurt more than fury ever could. Then she opened the final document, a timeline chart. Color-coded, chronologically aligned, detailed, dates of his absences, his excuses, correlated with receipts, correlated with text messages, correlated with Marissa's photos, all bound together in a precise pattern. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't emotional. Her tone stayed even, almost soothing. "I didn't want to react out of anger," she said. "So I waited. I watched. I verified everything before I let myself feel anything." He stared at the screen, then at her, this composed woman in a Bordeaux dress, sitting across from him like a judge who didn't raise her voice because the evidence was louder than any verdict. "Allison," his voice cracked. Please, she closed the laptop slowly. This, she said with a calmness that cut straight through him, is everything I gathered in 2 months. He felt himself unravel. Not because she screamed, not because she accused him, but because she had faced his betrayal with intelligence, clarity, and terrifying patience. And now that she had laid the truth bare, he understood something he had never understood before. He wasn't losing his wife. He had already lost her 2 months ago. The room fell into a heavy, echoing quiet after Allison closed the laptop. The click of the latch sounded like the closing of a door Andrew could never reopen. He stared at the polished surface of the coffee table, breathing hard, shoulders trembling under the weight of everything he had just seen. His chest felt tight, as though the air around him had thickened beyond what human lungs could hold. Then the breakdown came. "Allison, please!" His voice cracked immediately, raw and unsteady. I didn't mean for things to get this far. I swear. It was stupid. I was stupid. I don't even know why I wasn't thinking. He wasn't coherent. He wasn't composed. He wasn't the man she had married. He was a shaking figure on the edge of collapse. He moved forward as if to reach for her hand. But halfway there he stopped because she wasn't leaning away or recoiling. She was simply still, and that terrified him more than any rejection could have. "Allison, please say something," he whispered desperately. "Yell at me. Throw something. Tell me I ruined everything. Just don't sit there like this." Her eyes softened, not with forgiveness, but with a calmness he couldn't decipher. She folded her hands gently in her lap, the pearls in her ears glinting faintly under the lamp. "I'm not going to yell," she said quietly. He let out a broken breath, shaking harder. "Why not? I deserve it." "Yes," she answered with devastating calm. "You do." The words were soft, but they hollowed him out instantly. He dropped his head into his hands, fingers clawing at his hair. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I can fix this. I'll end it. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't give up on us." Allison watched him quietly, studying him the way a scientist observes a specimen under a microscope, not with cruelty, but with clarity. "And if I don't yell," she asked softly, "if I don't break anything, if I don't fall apart, does that scare you more?" He looked up, eyes wet. "Yes." She nodded. "Good." Her calmness was not indifference. It was intentional, measured, controlled. "I needed time," she continued, "to think, to understand what I wanted. So I didn't confront you right away. I didn't let emotions steer this." He blinked rapidly, trying to steady his breathing. She reached for a folder on the table. Not the laptop this time, but a plain manila folder he hadn't noticed earlier. She set it down gently between them. Andrew stared at it like it might explode. Inside were neatly clipped pages. He hesitated. What is this?" "Information," she said. "Options." His skin prickled. "Options for what?" "For what comes next." His throat constricted. Allison continued, her tone even, almost professional. "I spoke to a lawyer last week, just to understand the landscape. Minnesota is a no-fault divorce state, meaning I don't have to prove anything to proceed." He felt the blood drain from his face. "Our assets," she went on, "would be divided equitably, not equally, equitably, based on duration of marriage, income, contributions." A tear slipped down Andrew's cheek. "Allison, please!" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't comfort him. She simply finished her sentence. "And, of course, custody." Andrew froze. Custody. Their children. He clutched his knees, gasping. "I don't want to lose them." "I know," she said quietly. He looked up, eyes pleading. Are you filing?" Her expression remained unreadable. No, his breath escaped in a broken, disbelieving exhale. "But why? If you already spoke to someone, why not file?" She looked at him then, fully, deeply, and the calmness in her eyes was more devastating than anger could ever be. Because the real punishment, she said softly, is not the divorce. His heart thudded painfully, waiting for the rest. The real punishment, she continued, is watching yourself, living with what you did, seeing the consequences of your choices reflected back at you every day. He felt himself collapse inward, as though her words had cut the last string holding him together. She wasn't choosing screaming. She wasn't choosing vengeance. She was choosing silence, clarity, control, a punishment he couldn't outrun. Allison stood, slowly, smoothing the fabric of her Bordeaux dress. I'm not filing tonight, she said, or tomorrow. I want you to sit with what you've done, not to me, to our family. He looked up, broken. I love you. She paused, then shook her head once, gentle, final. You loved the version of me who didn't know. And with that, she walked past him, leaving him to drown in the unchosen path he had carved for himself. The days that followed unfolded with an unsettling serenity, so quiet, so steady, that Andrew found himself fearing the sound of his own footsteps. Allison moved through the house with the same gentle precision she always had, preparing breakfast, packing lunches, watering the plants near the kitchen window. She wasn't cold. She wasn't harsh. She simply existed beside him with a calmness that revealed nothing and said everything. It was the calm of a woman who no longer needed answers. The calm of someone who had already crossed an emotional distance he couldn't follow. Andrew felt it every morning when he entered the kitchen. The soft scrape of her knife against the chopping board, the steam curling from her mug of tea, the quiet hum of the dishwasher. Ordinary sounds. Yet each one carried a weight that pressed down on him like a sentence waiting to be read. He tried to bridge the silence. He offered to drive Mason to school. He offered to help Emily with her math homework. He filled the dishwasher, folded laundry, hovered near Allison with hesitant, helpless attempts at normalcy. But his presence only seemed to emphasize the space between them. She never pushed him away, but she never reached for him either. Living with her felt like living in a museum where every gesture was deliberate, every silence intentional, every glance a reminder of the truth he wished he could undo. The difference between them grew sharper at night. Allison slept soundly, her breathing slow and even. Andrew lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet rhythm of a woman who had already accepted the truth while he still fought against it in his own mind. He dreaded mornings, because morning meant more calmness. He dreaded evenings, because evenings meant more of her gentle quiet. He dreaded everything, really, except those brief moments when she let her guard fall just enough for him to hope. But hope died quickly. On the third evening, after the kids went to bed, Allison sat in the living room reading a book. Andrew sat across from her, pretending to scroll through his phone, but really watching her every subtle movement, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way she turned each page slowly, the soft crease that formed between her brows when a passage captivated her. He finally gathered the courage to speak. Allison, he whispered, are you going to leave me? She didn't look up. If I were going to leave, you wouldn't be asking that question. He swallowed hard. Then what happens now? She marked her page with a ribbon, closed the book gently and set it on the coffee table. When she lifted her gaze, her expression was calm, not forgiving, not bitter, just calm. Now, she said softly, you live with what you did. His breath stuttered. I am living with it. Every second. I know, she replied. That's the point. Her tone remained quiet, conversational, almost tender, but every word landed like a truth he could not escape. The following days continued in the same quiet rhythm. She cooked dinner. He set the table. She laughed with the children. He watched from a distance, wondering how many of those laughs he had stolen from her in the past 2 months. She made weekend plans for the family. He waited for the moment she would decide he wasn't part of those plans anymore. But the moment never came. That was the real torment. She hadn't chosen drama. She hadn't chosen revenge. She hadn't chosen punishment that could be measured or witnessed. She had chosen something far more devastating, letting him exist in the aftermath of his own betrayal, letting him feel the slow, steady unraveling of certainty, letting him wake each day unsure if she would still be there in the evening. On the seventh night, while she folded laundry at the dining table, Andrew finally broke again. "Allison, I can't keep living like this." She folded one last shirt, placed it on the stack, and looked at him with that same unshakable calm. "You already taught me how to live like this," she said softly. "I'm just letting you feel what you taught me to feel." The sentence sliced through the air with quiet precision. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words never came. There was nothing left to defend, nothing left to justify, nothing left to salvage, not until she chose what came next. And for now, she chose silence, not to hurt him, but to let the truth do the work. She gathered the folded clothes, turned off the dining room light, and walked down the hallway, leaving Andrew alone in the dim glow of the kitchen. He sat there long after she disappeared from view, breathing the hollow quiet she left behind, a quiet that wasn't vengeful, a quiet that wasn't angry, a quiet that was victorious, because some endings don't need fire or shouting or slammed doors. Some endings win by simply being calm, and Allison Grant, without raising her voice, without shedding a tear, had achieved the deepest victory of all.